You've mentioned before, and this has actually been mentioned on the sidelines of the ASEAN Summit, this Indonesian saying that diversity is actually a strength and actually a unifying force for countries. And we've seen that actually work, as you mentioned before, in ASEAN's favor, enable for some members to talk to certain blocs if they're closer in relations to the other. However, in this case, some have actually said that perhaps the diverging approaches to Myanmar seems to be hindering ASEAN from actually engaging Myanmar. Do you think that in this case, ASEAN needs to be more united than, say, quote-unquote, diverse in approaching the issue of Myanmar? Because for 2 years now, we haven't seen de-escalation of the violence. We haven't seen some of the issues of the five-point plan actually entertained or accepted by the junta and the warring state and the conflicting factions there, sir.
Absolutely, it must be made absolutely clear that the onus for change, for action, is on the junta side. They are the source of the current situation, and their actions have been reprehensible and to be condemned and deplored. And they are the party that needs to take certain actions as expected of them. At the same time, within ASEAN, there is a variation of views on the matter. It doesn't have to be an issue that divides us, because, as I said before, our diversity in the past have been our strength. Now, if it is the case that some ASEAN member states, some may have a special channel with the different parties in Myanmar, those channels must be utilized, must be taken advantage of, and must be given space to develop, while eventually everything is brought under the common ASEAN home. But if ASEAN was to adopt a very rigid and define unity as being uniformity of approach, then I think there is a risk of a stalemate, as we are just now seeing, because I get the sense personally ASEAN is like lost for ideas. What are the next steps? One can speak with eloquence about what individual member states wish to happen in Myanmar, but first and foremost, we need to have a common ASEAN position. And at the moment, I am reminded more about the divisions rather than the unity. And this is certainly not helpful for ASEAN's cause, because this is not only a litmus test for ASEAN, but in my view, it's an existential threat to ASEAN, the notion of ASEAN community.
Right. Yeah. But I also want to talk about another issue that could test the unity and the ability of ASEAN to act as a cohesive bloc, the South China Sea once again. And we do, this time around, you have Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines saying that the 10-dash line is not valid. It encroaches on their areas, other exclusive economic zones. But again, these are 3 out of 10 nations in Southeast Asia. At this meeting, do you think that ASEAN at least can develop a code of conduct like Indonesia is trying to push forward? Perhaps a cohesive response to whether or not this line has to be addressed, especially because there seem to be signs that there's not as much of a unified stance on what's happening in the South China Sea and its ability to abide by international protocols.
Well, all the way back in 2002, when the Declaration of Conduct on the South China Sea was adopted, some 2 decades ago, ASEAN member states have already resolved that while on the one hand, there are only some countries of Southeast Asia that have disputes in the South China Sea, that there is an common ASEAN approach. That's why we have been working as a 10 on the South China Sea issue. However, lately, I find a situation where some ASEAN member states in disputes in the South China Sea feel that they are not being provided a common ASEAN home, so as if they are left on their own devices to deal with this issue. And therefore, this is something that I think must be addressed. A clear signal must come from this summit that while it is the case that there are only some countries that have disputes in the South China Sea, this is a common ASEAN issue, that there is a common 10 ASEAN member states position on the South China Sea, and we must not allow countries like the Philippines, like Malaysia, Brunei, and others who have disputes in the South China Sea as if they are on their own and feel that their security needs are being unmet by ASEAN. Indonesia have been at the spearhead in the past in trying to bring a common ASEAN position, but we must work hard to ensure this remains the case. Otherwise, we will have an a la carte regionalism. People will pick and choose the bit of regional cooperation that they like. Yes,
absolutely. And